stages, I want to look at the key aspects. That Ubuntu philosophy embraces the principles of forgiveness and reconciliation. That if there is a problem, if there is a dispute, if there is a conflict, it's possible to forgive, it's possible to reconcile if you adopt the Ubuntu philosophy. It embraces principles of reciprocity, inclusivity, the whole idea of equality of everyone within society, and a sense of shared destiny among people in a group setting. It provides the rationale for letting go of the desire for revenge for any past wrongs, and the perspective that a value system where individuals will give and receive forgiveness. Now that Ubuntu philosophy then, I'm arguing needs to be reconceptualized. Why? Because what you see all around in Africa today, you don't see that Ubuntu philosophy being actualized. You know, the majority of people in modern society have lost sense of that common destiny, the common trust of trusting each other. They lack common ideals, and there is the predominance of vices and deviant behavior, including the rise in crime, economic morality, corruption, you know, violence. There's a lack of social supportive structures which promote peace, love, and the means through which individuals can work together. There's erosion of traditional codes of humanism, which have resulted in a surge of violence in society. So the Ubuntu philosophy is not being actualized. So Western culture of individualism has slowly permeated Africa and is upheld as superior through globalization and its agents. So as I said earlier, most of what is African is not valued, is relegated to the back seat. And so that there is need then to go back to see how we can be able to live out the Ubuntu philosophy that was being advocated by the likes of Archbishop Tutu. So how can that be done? But through the restoration of virtues and the principles of generosity and dignity and respect and hospitality, through upholding equality, because if you have governance systems that are not ensuring equality, then that is usually, of course, the starting of the feeling of certain sections of the population being left out, and the grievances begin. So we need to restore public morality. We need to revive the cultural activities which promote development of a sense of belonging and identity, and to restore a sense of shared morality. Coming to the councils of elders that I mentioned in my title, the mute and the Nchurin Cheke councils of elders. I see them in the traditional African sense. We know that before colonialism came into Africa, Africans had their own systems of governance. We had centralized authority that espoused the Ubuntu philosophy. Right across the continent of Africa, from Kenya, you had the Wanga Kingdom, Uganda had the Baganda Kingdom, in West Africa, they had the Sokoto Caliphate, we had the Ashanti Kingdom, in Southern Africa, we had the Zulu Kingdom, and many others. These kingdoms were centralized and they governed themselves effectively. They were peaceful until colonialism came. Most of these kingdoms had the institutions of councils of elders. And councils of elders are the custodians of culture. Today, when you look at the most developed countries, if you go to America, the Americans speak English, Russians speak their language, the Chinese speak their language, the Finns speak their language. Only in Africa do you not find a language that the African people can speak, language of their own. That identity of the African is not there. Now, the councils of elders, I am arguing, espoused and consolidated and ensured that they promoted the culture of their people and the identity of their people in such a way that this builds cohesion and unity of purpose. So when you look at the literature of those that have written about, the institutions of elders, they emphasize the idea that elders in the traditional African sense are custodians of, communal unity. They mediate and reconcile communities. Their core responsibilities is to act as intermediary by conducting investigations if there is a problem, questioning victims, perpetrators, in other words, reconciling and building peace among us communities, the community, and ensuring the community is cohesive and peaceful. Now, that has been eroded, as I said earlier, because of modernization, which relegates these very, very important traditional institutions to the periphery, while promoting those practices that are Western and those approaches that are Western that are supposed to be seen as very, very effective. And yet we know they are not, because the agendas they serve are totally different. So when you look at this Kalenjin Council of Elders, which, by the way, still does exist today and it is effective, those who come from Kenya know that among the Kalenjin, this Council of Elders is important in terms of being as the custodian of the Kalenjin culture, in terms of promoting Kalenjin communal unity. Mm-hmm. Somebody can argue that, well, can that then create division, the sense of us as a community vis-a-vis the other community in the other context? No, because African traditions do recognize the sense of oneness and belonging, even within the context of diversity. So my argument is that we need to strengthen these institutions. We need to be proud of them. We need to be able not to allow, those external interests that relegate these institutions to the periphery to take root. Finally, of course, in terms of critique, we have also seen in some contexts where politicians infiltrate some of these cultural institutions, and in the sense of, for political reasons, end up dividing society, and especially when in contexts where there is contestations for political power, etc. And that for me is a wider problem, which is in the context of the weakness, if you will, the lack of strong leadership, political leadership in the context where our political leaders have abandoned Ubuntu, have allowed themselves to be, instruments for division in terms of first exploiting their people, expanding inequality, entrenching corruption, and the generally poor governance system that in the end, ensure our societies are divided, there is lack of peace, and these institutions that ought to be helping us become peaceful then don't perform or don't function properly. So in conclusion, as I have said earlier, my argument is we operationalize these strong African approaches, the Ubuntu philosophy, the traditional institutions, but at the same time also finding a way, if we can, to change the international order, which relegates Africa in the periphery, the political, the economic, and the social international order that ensures that the Africans remain poor and dependent on the West, and at the same time expect that same West to solve their problems. It cannot happen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation on Ubuntu, right? And we have in Russia one of the leading experts on Ubuntu, right? Diplomacy, right? Is of course Professor Vladimir Gennadievich Shubin. Vladimir Gennadievich, as we started to speak about Ubuntu, probably you could say a few words to comment, right? Our colleague is from Kenya, right? So he gave like Kenyan example of Ubuntu, right? Microphone. Could you unmute?
Yes, please. Let me do that. Let me first of all exit the.
No.
Where is my? Yeah, hold on a second.
Yes.
Yes, but I can't see it. Do you see me?
Yes. We can see you and hear you perfect.
No, I think the idea of Ubuntu is very attractive. If you remember, at some stage, you included it in the future book on the theory of African countries, but in reality, on theory of non-Western theory, political studies. But in reality, when you look at the internet, you see Ubuntu not so much as theory there, but a certain device created by famous Elon Musk, you see. That's a bit different. And I believe that in reality, again, unfortunately, as good as it sounds, not much of Ubuntu is applied, both in international relations and in internal policy of at least most of the African countries. I'm sorry to say this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Shubin. Stefan, what are your counter remarks, if any?
I agree. I agree with Professor Shubin. I mean, it's true. It is true. The philosophy is good. The application is lacking. And that's why I'm calling in my paper that we need to revisit it. We need to reconceptualize it. We need to apply it. Even within our own governance systems, in our own political governance, you don't see it. You don't see our leaders apply this very, very important philosophy. You see leaders looting from their own people. You see leaders abusing the human rights of their people. You see leaders using their positions to enrich themselves and their cronies. So you don't see them live the Ubuntu philosophy by ensuring that their people are equality is ensured, prosperity is shared, there is a shared future like the Ubuntu philosophy envisages. That you don't see in many parts of our, especially in the African continent. And yet, they should be doing better. Thank you.
May I comment also?
Yes, Yannick, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan, for this interesting report. Fully agree with you. And fortunately, as it was mentioned already, we can see, for example, within the United Nations, we have the Chapter 6, which must, give us a good vision of what we do understand by negotiation and so on, at international level. And the question why at the African level we didn't include, for example, the African method, African way to deal African crisis or African problems by including our own method, our traditional way of dealing the cases. That is something that needs to really to be discussed, and why not even the chapter of the AU also, why not need to be revised in order to include such also an approach in the statute of the African Union. So it's a very exciting report, and thank you for this approach.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stefan. Could you stop sharing your screen? I would ask if...
Yes, Chair. I am trying to see how I can stop sharing my... Yes, I have seen it. Stop sharing.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm good now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And then I would ask if we have just a second, if we have Sanjay.
No, we don't have him with us. He has left because he has some agency things to do.
Okay. Then we continue our topic, right, with different traditional institutions. We spoke a lot about Ubuntu, and now Yannick, probably I am wrong, right? But we go to Gachacha, right? Or Yannick?
Yeah, Gakaka.
Gakaka. We know from Ubuntu we go to Gakaka, right? Another how to say, peace building instrument, right? Like purely African peace building instrument, right?
So, could you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. As you can see, my topic will be the continuation of many of our colleagues that already made a speech on the same issue concerning the African way to deal with African problems. So, but first of all, I think that it should be the continuation of the speech of Professor Mézières, but unfortunately we were a little bit separated. So, but that is not nothing matters, so it's normal. As you can see, my topic is the concept of African solution for African problems, the peace building in Africa, Rwanda in focus. So the case of Gakaka, yeah, got after the Ubuntu, of course, why not the case of Gakaka is a great example that we had at international level in terms of international criminal approaches. So I know that we have not a lot of time, but I will try to do my best to do it in 15 minutes also as my colleagues. So we'll discuss on the peace building in the international, an international criminal system. So the role of the extrajudicial mechanism also in Africa and conflict management, and then the African concept of the justice itself and peace building. So it was very interesting today. Even the first part of the, in the morning, I was I just go through some, to get some information, and I get. I got access to a website of, as we call it, African Peace Building Network. So we have such an institution that exists in Africa with a good website. And then I check a lot of informations, and they did a great job. Why? Because they publish. They had a good publication for. In 2018, they made an interesting, overview of recent trends in African scholarly writing on peace building. Most of African researchers that are applying in this sphere. It was very interesting for me to know about most of them. But unfortunately, I remarked that most of these researchers, scientists, are only from some African countries, particularly English-speaking countries. Even those from French-speaking countries are not included. And also, unfortunately, I remarked that also most of them are Western European scientists, are Russian scientists also neglected in this list, unfortunately. But it was a good, interesting, good experience. It was very interesting for me, and I check it. So for those who want to get some information, I found that you can get access to, in the internet, you can find African Peace Building Network. They have interesting information concerning the mechanism. And also, as you can see here, of course, we have a lot of sources. Yeah, those who are particularly touching the case of Rwanda and the traditional justice and the traditional way of dealing African cases also is something also very interesting. I read a lot of them and I get a lot of information, but we have not a lot of time. I try to go fastly as possible. Talking about the peace building, I will not go to repeat everything that's been already said today. Yeah, and but there are some also important, informations that I got. For example, Cedric Deconan, also, even the previous one, Gabriela Monica, she's also one of the greatest, US UN advisor. She made a lot of, reports in terms of peace building within the United Nations. She has also a lot of information about what we understand by peace, peacekeeping, peace building, and so on. So all information that we are discussing today. And also Cedric Deconan, despite he's working in the field of the climate change, but he has a lot of also information, works on peace building, and particularly he has also the UN experiences on also in this field. This was very interesting, just to read them. Therefore, I just mentioned them. And before starting, let's start with this situation here of David Francis. David Francis now is the foreign minister of the Republic of Sierra Leone. Yeah, he is also a great researcher, as you can see, yeah, by the field of peace studies, has been crafted in Europe American institutions and largely by scholars from Europe and North America, neglecting the fact that Africa had a well-developed and tested indigenous approaches and method of conflict management and peace building. That's exactly what my colleagues say, I mean, the previous presentation. So that is not something new. And also at the beginning, the Professor Mizeb also said that the way, I mean, now the international way of dealing crisis in the world, and particularly in Africa, is not the African way to deal. The crisis. So talking about the, I found that there's no matter to go back deeply to the history, but I will try to give you some information briefly. And when exactly started this keeping mission, particularly after the peace building function, particularly after the Second World War, the creation of the Nuremberg Tribunal and the Tokyo mechanism and so on. It's something very important because that's really affected the international concept of dealing, with the peace, peace building. So the most important for us is what do you understand by particularly the peace building? That is something very important. Why? That could help us to understand really which consists of peace building, and international tribunal mechanism is an important part of the peace building missions, because the reconstitution of judiciary, national judicial system is a part of the system, but at the same time, the exercise of international justice is also very important as a complementary means in order to deal with the cases that happen in Africa. In the world, and particularly in Africa. So therefore, as you can see, the ICC, International Criminal Court for Nuremberg, Tokyo, and the former Yugoslavia, and so on, uses as mechanisms to, deal with the, the huge violation of human rights, particularly for those who are committing, as we call them, serious international crimes. So the aim, as I mentioned, of international mechanism is make accountability for those people who have violated, international criminal laws. So making accountability, if you go back to also to the international criminal system, last month, particularly 2 months ago, I have the publication about the evolution of this system. The first stage, particularly after the creation of the International Criminal Tribunal for Nuremberg and Tokyo and so on, the aim was, the approach was completely different from what's happened later. You know that at the first stage, most of the persons that have been suspected or have been convicted were, sentenced by death penalty, most of them. But with the evolutions, particularly from the former Yugoslavia tribunal to Rwanda and so on, the system have been a little bit changed. Why? Because from the death penalty, we come to life sentence or to another measure or another means of convicting. So that's something that's very interesting. Taking into account the evolution of the system at international level. But as I mentioned, that is not the African way to deal with the crisis, because the experience has shown that in Africa, this approach didn't, serve the situation at place. So we have another mechanism, another way to deal with African, crisis, You have the experience of Rwanda that I will talk about later. So, and then the case of South Africa, the draft commissions and so on in Sierra Leone, Uganda, Kenya. In Latin America, also, these mechanisms have been really, work in terms of managing local crisis. So, coming to the African concept of peace building. So, as you can see, particularly regarding the justice, you can see here, for example, here is the example of Rwanda, how Rwanda did with the after the post genocide period. So the Gakaka court, which consists of the Gakaka court, I don't want to go back to the history of the genocide. You know it.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Yeah. So what have been done and how it was qualified by at international level, the creation of the international tribunal for Rwanda and so on, how many people have been convicted. I think that you are no lawyers, though it's not interesting for you. The achievement of the RCP and so on. But something very interesting. Yeah, you can see that more than 1 million people have been convicted by the Gakaka system tribunals. So what consists of this kind of Gakaka? As we call it in French, Apalam, also in English, yeah, Palaver tree also. That's the African way to deal with the African crisis. And that have already worked, always work, whatever the place. It's have been proved. Mbutu also, as it was mentioned, is one of the mechanisms that also being using. But the system is already the same. So this mechanism is really effective, and that was also the inspiration of the African, Rwanda's leaders to deal with the crisis that happened. So it was a kind of transitional justice that used the traditional way. So you can see, for example, here, so for example, the classification of crimes and how it was dealt within this Gakaka tribunals. How many cases have been also dealt within this crisis? And most important, here you can see the sentence. It's not so different from the international level. The international mechanism that we have. But you have here, we can see forced labor also. The international mechanism didn't provide, so that is a African method also that used to be, used by different. So the achievement of the Gakaka court was here very important here to underline it. Is the restoration of the dignity, the justice for the victims and the reconciliation within the communities. Because the European system didn't provide such kind of reconciliations. The aim of the European system, as I mentioned, is just to punish, but not to make any kind of reconciliation. So the criticism to the Gakaka system, the Gakaka court as a local court, local traditional court, here you can see, the removal of the, the acting or the ruling party from the crime that have been committed, and also. But this criticism is not only regarding to the Gakaka court, but also even at international level. We know that within the tribunal, Rwanda tribunal, of course, they have also, as a Professor Mezev today say, international mechanism usually choose one side. So that is something also that's happened. And then the repression against the witnesses and so on. Of course, there are some difficulties that happen because we neglect also, I want to mention it, the traditional way of deal with national issues. So the advantages is very important here, as we can see here, I could mention here, more than 12,000 community-based court tried more than 1 million cases for the country for this traditional mechanism. So that is not possible to deal with the international system that exists. Try 1,000, more than 1 million person will take into account the international system more than 100 years. So that is not possible, and that is not effective to African way to deal with African issues. So the Gakaka happened in Rwanda, and as it was mentioned, Ubuntu also as other means of dealing with African problems must be also encouraged. And so why not, as I mentioned, this situation needs to be really studied at the African level for by African leaders, needed to include it into African mechanisms to solve African problems. So I would like to finish with this situation also of the George Aite. Aite is the coiner of what we call African system for African problem. He's a Ghanaian of origin, a scholar that living in the USA, of course. But as he mentioned, something very important. If you formulate your own solution to your problems, you have every reason and incentive to see them work. External and foreign solutions were not valid, in Africa, since they were either imported or dictated to Africans. So that is something very important, and we need to take into account. If you want to real the situation to be improved in Africa, we need to take into account the African traditional way to deal with the African solution. The case of Rwanda is a good example that we have now. So I would like to start here. Maybe I will have a lot of questions in order to be, more broader, give more explanation to any point that I mentioned. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yaonikes. Dear colleagues, any comments on GKK and Ubuntu? Yes, Steven. Yeah. Please, yeah.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful presentation. I worked in Rwanda some time back. Well, Rwanda was one of the countries that I was focusing on. I was covering, because I was based in Burundi, but covering about 10 countries in the region at a time when the Gachacha process had almost completed, but well, it remains in the news as a very, very good example of localized dispute resolution mechanisms. What do you say about the criticism that these courts are not applicable, cannot be replicated, for example, in similar situations because of the cultural specificities and the complex, the conflict context of Rwanda? From where you sit and from your experience, do you think the Gachacha experience can be replicated elsewhere in similar circumstances?
Thank you for your question. Of course, I don't require the system to be used in other places, in Africa, because as I mentioned, it's not the only way to deal with African social problems. You mentioned, for example, the Ubuntu also, yeah, for example, why not in Kenya and so on, or in Central Africa. But the case, the example for Kenya is a good example. Me, for example, I'm Akan from West Africa, for example. Yeah, Ashanti way to deal with a problem in West Africa is completely different also to the Gakaka. It's not so far. It's not so far. In terms of mode of applications. So, as you mentioned, the traditional leaders, the chiefs, traditional chiefs, usually are the key element in terms of reconciliation in Africa, and particularly in West Africa, as the work is also in Central Africa. And this mechanism, I think that it's really a good experience. Why I mentioned the case of Gakaka or Gachacha is depend on the, because I discussed about the pronunciation with the former ambassador for Kenya here in Russia, Jean d'Arc. Maybe you know her. Of course, the way how it is writing is different from the local pronunciation, of course. But as I mentioned, it's a good experience that needs to be also being taken into account in the solving African problem in the different African states. As the Russian representative also mentioned, we can't transfer one mechanism to another, from one country to another country. The situations are different, and the mechanism should be adapted to the situations.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on GKK? on Ubuntu, right? Okay, before we go, thank you very much, Yaunikes, right? You were very active during the whole seminar, right? The first section, so you asked a lot of questions, right? And now you finally made your presentation, right? I would like to ask if we have Dr. Joshua Olusegun Balarinwa from Nigeria, right? Whether he managed to join us finally.
He was with us, and then I think that he just disappeared.
Because I am in contact, right, with his colleagues, right, and Dr. Balarinwa, right? Balarinwa, no. Okay, if he will join us, right, we will give him the floor, right? But now let's go once again to Kenya, right? To our. It's a pleasure to present Anita Kiamba, right? University of Nairobi. Anita, nice to meet you. Haven't seen you for no, not for several months, for half a year like this, right? How
Yes.
are you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much, Chair. I think quite a number of familiar faces. Greetings to everyone. My name is Anita Kiamba from the University of Nairobi, more particularly from the Department of Diplomacy and International Studies. I would also like to, first and foremost, by the way, thank you for once again bringing me on board to quite an important seminar discussion or workshop for that matter. To the colleagues who are here, I just say hi to you and thank you for letting me give and share the opportunity to share my thoughts basically today. Today, what am I going to focus on? A very interesting area. This is adopting African approaches in peacemaking in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We know that the DRC has been in news for a long period of time, and indeed, certain issues are beginning to unravel currently. I'm more interested currently in the M23 because it seems to be on everyone's mouth, everyone's mind. When you look at the region, when you look at other actors, for instance, the United States of America, and those who are interested basically in ensuring that there is peace and stability in the region, including other actors who've since come into this fray to try to, provide a way forward in terms of the conflict. So what I'll do now, I hope I do not take too much time. I had a lecture today and I think I've got so much energy, but I'll try to limit, my discussions and my focus in terms of what I need to say. So I need to start by letting you know the basis of my thoughts and where I've come from in terms of analyzing this particular issue, because of course it is one of those issues within many issues. When you talk about DRC and the various crises and the wars, there have been many, but suddenly there seems to be more momentum with regards to what is going on currently. So the basis of my thoughts are derived from conflict analysis and more particularly from conflict studies. The idea here is that we need to identify who are the parties in conflict and what are the issues in conflict. So I am limiting myself to M23 because there have been several parties in this conflict, both internal and external. So it's nice to always zero in and try to find out, what is the issue? And are we going then to recollect our ideas in terms of momentum or forward movement when it comes to the resolution of this particular conflict? So what I do within that conflict analysis, as always, we've got to identify the conflict system. This is basically to identify which other parties are there, what are the issues, who are the actors, their interests, and of course the issues when they get into such, conflict situations. So I'll try to do that quite quickly. I'll also, at the same time, because in my mind, I've identified DRC as an epicenter of conflict in the Great Lakes region. Indeed, the epicenter keeps shifting. DRC is just one of those epicenters. We've had other epicenters in terms of Burundi, the Central African Republic, Rwanda before that, and so on. So I'm limiting myself to DRC, and of course the shifting, identities within that particular conflict, the issues and the parties in terms of what they want to do. So what is the background and the context? Even though I know that we possibly know, I don't have to really repeat and tell you, and take you back to history, but it's always nice, if I can give you the context and, because it's the one that I'm laying the basis of my ideas. We know that DRC became independent in 1960. And since 1960, it has had 3 major wars, which has given us scholars and of course policymakers a lot to think and write about, and always go back, in terms of generalizing. If we had another conflict like this in Africa, how would we manage it? And who are the actors, who are the parties, and what do we need to do in terms of coming up with African approaches to the issues that we do have? So I'll just give you again, even though it has been said before, after its independence in 1960, DRC had a lengthy period of having peacekeeping operations, and later on they transformed into, peace support operations, which further gives us a bird's eye view to analyze the transformation of conflict, the parties, the actors, the relationships that they had, and why there was need to transform that, movement from one, PKO or peacekeeping operation into a PSO, and the failures of that, because my entry point is peacemaking, matters of negotiation, matters of mediation, matters of good offices and the like, which have terribly failed in this particular conflicts that we've seen. So anyway, we see basically, if we go back again from the 1960s and coming back, into the 1990s, there was a wave of revolution in the Great Lakes region. DRC was just one of those many countries that had one of those waves of revolution. The others were Rwanda, Burundi. And they witnessed quite a lot when we see the ouster of Mobutu Sese Seko from government, in order to create a more inclusive and democratic government, because that was the whole idea. Let us remove him. He's been a stalwart in this particular problem that we are calling a conflict or a crisis in the DRC. So maybe with the Kabilas, we'll get to see a more inclusive environment with all, the actors, even those that were agitating during Mobutu's days. However, though, we don't see much happening. Indeed, what we see is the emergence of splinter groups in not only DRC, but the Great Lakes region, with parties coming in, supporting others, and making the issue quite complex in terms of how do we differentiate who the actors are, the parties are, the complexities and the issues that seem to always come back, and we are going round in circles when it comes to management and even providing African solutions to this particular conflict. So we've got currently indeed a multiple of armed groups, splinter groups. Every other single day we hear about other splinter groups that come up, but I'm more interested in M23 because there seems to be a lot of focus. They're the ones that have come out to actually negotiate and be facilitated in terms of negotiating with the government. So indeed that, we are more interested in why the M23, why not other groups, and who are they anyway? So anyway, in terms of the parties, there have been many. One of the parties is the government through the National Army. And the National Army is considered to be one of those parties that also is no different from these armed groups. They're engaged in rampage, they rape, and so on. And they're not a professional army, as it were. And that it actually becomes a problem in itself, because then how are you going to manage? How are you even going to reintegrate this M23 into the national army if they do not have that stability, if they do not have that professional army, as it was? So there are many overlapping complexities when it comes to this particular issue that I'm looking at. So anyway, in terms of other parties, I'll not give you a rundown of many, because there are about 50 parties that we can actually identify and describe as being important in the conflict. But the ones that emerge are, of course, the National Army and, of course, the government itself on one side. The other is FDLR, and in English, that's Democratic Forces for Liberation of Rwanda, and they are considered to be the genocideers, the ones who are engaged in genocide against the Tutsi. Then you've got your CNDP, which is basically in English again, National Congress for the Defense of the People. And later on, M23 emerges from CNDP. Some of them were integrated into the National Army. Others became a political party, but others decided they are going back to Rwanda. They'll regroup while they are in Rwanda and Uganda to come back to engage and continue fighting. So we see this movement becoming a new movement, because of the failures of the movement. I mean, because of the failures of the peace treaty that was signed on March 23rd, 2009. Yeah, and they feel that, okay, we never got into the military national army, we never got a political party, we've been told that we do not belong. We belong in another country where we have similarities culturally. Yeah, so for them, one of the big issues is that they still argue that they belong in DRC. When it was being crafted, they were there. So how are they being told, go back to where you came from and the like, which of course the neighbors are not too fond of hearing that. So the other actors could be the ADF. This is basically from Uganda, the Ugandan affiliated rebel group. This is the Allied Defense Forces. You've got your Mai that were there before, that often believed that Congo is for the indigenous people. Anyone that does not look like anyone from the forest or the Congo basin should just go back where they came from. You can find your relatives, across the border and the like. So it becomes quite difficult. Yes. All right. So it becomes quite difficult to try to understand, to weave out the issues and to say these are the issues and how we can go along them, particularly as an African. When you're told that you belong elsewhere, you don't belong, you don't look like us. There are deeper issues, there are deeper sentiments. So the M23 basically were defeated initially. They went back into, like I said, Rwanda and Uganda. They regrouped, came back, and they decided to now come back home and, of course, situate themselves where they belong. But of course, where they belong, which is Eastern Congo, it is a mining area. There are many resources there. So again, the issue is not even about them, but how do we access, as government, that particular, the resources that are there in. On the other hand, what's the government's position on all this? When Tshisekedi, the president, became president in 2019, there was a different idea on how DRC will approach this particular issue. So his ideas and later on were being fielded across the board by his entry, or the country's entry, into the East African Police. That's IAPCO first, because that's how he entered, and then the East African Community. So his position and the government position was basically to withdraw, for the M23 to withdraw from those territories where they are. Yeah, and go back to their initial positions. But then the question is, are they a conventional military, or army? Because how do you retreat to your initial position if you are born there? Where are you retreating to? And that becomes, of course, a problem for the neighbors, because we are not getting them. They are not ours. They are Congolese. So you have to, as a country, deal with that. Then, of course, the other thing that the government says is that we'll have the regional East African force, the East African Community Force, not ESF, which is the East African Standby Force, come together. Let's see what we can do. And Kenya, of course, is released into that foray. But then what do we expect when it comes to the relations between these countries with these new ideas that are being floated around? Then, of course, there are those who in government who argue that the various actors should be disarmed and repatriated. We know in international law, when you talk about repatriation, you're being taken back to your country or where you've come from. So again, very inconsistent, and we are not too sure, because M23 say there's nothing like that. We belong here. I mean, we are Congolese. We've got, you know, everything that we were in terms of being in this country. So their position, this is the position of M23 rather, that we are not going to be repatriated. We are Eastern Congolese and we are Congolese citizens. Secondly, they still have grievances. They argue that they are being discriminated against because they are not, according to other populations, the indigenous people of that country. So for them, they think about galvanizing the resources where they are. And of course, it becomes a big more, or rather it becomes, you know, more complex. They also argued that, what does it mean to be taken back to your initial position, yet you're not a conventional military? You know, that is military parlance when you say that you have to fall back, you know, go back, and we'll actually disarm you from there. And it's only disarmament. We are not hearing about DDR, you know, and reintegration of the M23 back into society or into various government agencies like the military, the police, as in the case with other conflicts. So what are the observations lastly, as I come to an end, because I've got to, you know, summarize and put everything into context. My observations is that they've had several talks, several peace processes that have never really yielded successful outcomes to the conflict. Indeed, the recent ceasefire is just but a pause, you know, in the conflict before there's continuation. We know that ceasefires are never really meant to be, you know, they're just there to take time off, relax, and maybe even go and fuel yourself, get more arms and the like, and re-strategize. So we should be thinking about what are they re-strategizing, not necessarily the government, but the M23. We know that indeed other efforts, whether it is negotiation, mediation, the use of good officers, whether it is Lusaka, Nairobi, Luanda, in Angola, have not really yielded so much as we would have expected them. So what next? What next? M23 is a central party. And in my mind, the only way we can approach this from an African point of view is to engage at the community level and engage in dialogue. Dialogue is one of the, it's part and parcel of Article 33 that requires that countries should, and actors should go, and parties should go beyond and engage in a variety of activities in order to settle disputes and to resolve conflict. So for them, they still have trust issues. Trust is a big issue. So how do we regain the trust from government, from M23? You know, this has got nothing to do with let us, you know, have a power sharing agreement. That is not enough. It's about the trust that will not tell us that we belong elsewhere, yet we are citizens of this country and we must be included in mass participation. So in my mind, I'm believing that I believe that we should be looking at conciliation, dialogue, and reconciliation. That's the only way. Power sharing agreements are usually for settlement of disputes. Yeah, and it will, of course, deal with matters like the resources that they are fighting over. But beyond that, the trust is very important. We're also thinking about grievances such as discrimination. They feel that they are grieved and, you know, they are discriminated against. How do you offer that trust? You know, we have to go back as, you know, African brothers and sisters to say that, yes, our communities were divided during the Berlin Conference. But beyond that, let us work towards, you know, stability and peace. Also, the settlement in the areas where the M23 is, because that's where they've grown up, that's their area anyway. So how do you dismantle a population and move it elsewhere? It may be good on paper, but how do you just take people from one place to another place? It cannot happen, you know. Also, the other things that we need to discuss is the lack of basic infrastructure. The DRC is so large that some areas do not have basic infrastructure, and that becomes, again, another grievance that indeed the M23 have. Also, the lack of acknowledgement of citizenship. You have the right of that citizenship. So how is it that you're being alluded to belong elsewhere? many, many deep issues that can only be confronted with using dialogue, because dialogue is the only way we can actually find that we have peaceful outcomes that are more sustainable for this particular issue. So thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Anita, for your thorough analysis. Dear colleagues, any comments, any questions to Anita? Bihruz, yes, please.
Thank you very much for this speech, because it was interesting to listen about Democratic Republic of Congo and the internal political processes that are going on in this country. And I began recently studying this country, and I would like to ask you a question. What do you think, what is the main reason for Le Mouvement 213 for fighting and how this organization was created? Because I've just begun reading information about this, but for me, it's a bit difficult to understand maybe the main feature in this question, in this issue. And by the way, I would like to thank you, all of you, because this format is one of the most, is one of the highest formats that I have participated, and I'm deeply impressed to see a lot of experts from different countries, and especially from Kenya and Nigeria and other East African countries. That means that relations between our university and between these countries are on the highest level. Thank you again.
Anita, yes.
All right. Okay. Okay. Thanks you so much. And thank you so much for your question. You know, when you talk about what is the reason for them to engage in fighting, many complex and overlapping issues. In my mind, I think the way the conflict was dealt with initially by having peacekeepers on the ground did not offer any solution. Because when you talk about a country that is such large in size, and then there are other complexities in terms of, are you going to become democratic? Are you going to become, you know, communist? It started off from there, and we see a lot of push and pull, basically in DRC. But later on, of course, they were given that they became independent, but they never galvanized, neither did they ever fully consolidate power in the entire country. And neither did they go ahead to even offer stability as government to the people who are there, because it's a large population, it's a large area. But if you look at what goes on in DRC, you'll find a lot of foreign companies, you know, extracting resources along that belt, and basically meaning that they're not able to even take care of themselves when someone else is coming in to extract those resources from them. So it is a pity, though. It is a pity, but we are seeing maybe light at the end of the tunnel, because Tshisekedi is more or less more alive to the fact that the International Conference on the Great Lakes region did not really provide too much, because as member states, they are not really bound to ensure that the conflict has been managed. Neither can you really interfere or intervene in the conflict. So the only mechanism that was open and available for that was through the East African community, because we know that DRC is a member of a multiple number of regional organizations in Africa. You know, from ECAS, which deals with, you know, Central African issues, to SADC in Southern Africa. And then recently, of course, it becomes a member of the East African community. We've been a small community before, and we've tried as much as possible, while engaging or bringing in members, that those members must be at least stable enough, you know, to trade with. So of course, there are many possibilities now that they are members of the East African community. It just means that, of course, the ESC or the East African community had to change, because we didn't necessarily have a mechanism that would bring the military together. We had individual nations pursuing their own, you know, security interests. in their neighbors. But now with all this, we see that, of course, there's need for DRC to stand up and for its neighbors to also say that it's time for them to actually behave accordingly or become stable if they want to become, to become members of a group of countries that are stable enough to trade with. Now, what else are they fighting for? I think they are deep-seated issues, because if you look at the resources that are found in DRC, those resources are not owned by the people. Yeah, so there's still, a lot of inconsistency in terms of who owns the minerals and for what reason, and for how will we go ahead to ensure that those resources are kept here. And if they are not kept here, it's okay, because we don't add value, because we know they don't add value. There's no way about saying it. They can't process what they do have. So out of the relationships that they have with other countries, what do they get back? So again, they need to go back to the drawing board in terms of negotiation, particularly negotiations on trade agreements. Other issues are ethnicity, that overlap, in Africa. But for them, it has been long-standing. I think it's a high time for them to, get countries that have been through all these problems in order to guide them, how they are able to move ahead and become part and parcel of a small group of nations that consider them to be large enough to trade with and also to assist in many other ways, rather than just providing, a semblance of stability for them.
Okay, thank you very much, Anita. I guess we have one more question for you from your colleague from Kenya, right, Stefan? Yeah, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anita, for the presentation. I would like to tell the panel that I was deeply involved in the last peace process. The last peace process that involved the M23 in 2012-2013 in Kampala. I was chief of staff, actually, of the facilitation effort sponsored by the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, where I worked. This time, the process is sponsored by the EAC, as Anita has told us. And frankly, when we left the signing ceremony of the conclusion of that process at State House in Nairobi, soon after President Kenyatta had gotten into office, about 6 or so months, that was in December 2013, on the December 12th, actually, 2013. When we left the State House, I mentioned to colleagues that we will soon see an M25, yeah, or M27. Why? Because the manner in which the last peace process was concluded was precisely the same way the previous one that had been mediated by Olusegun Obasanjo, former president of Nigeria, had concluded. Frankly speaking, Anita, you have been a little bit soft because you didn't go into the real issues. Why M23? Because from where I sit, you cannot discuss M23 without discussing the resources in Eastern DR Congo, because that's where the problem is. The problem is that you keep, the thing is, I will say it as it is, the thing is that you keep DRC as unstable as possible to facilitate the systematic mining and the looting of the resources in Congo. That is the problem. And the interests span the region. You have regional actors. I liked your approach, to use the actor analysis to identify who is involved. When you develop your paper, look at the regional actors involved. Who are the regional conspirators that facilitate M23 and other rebel groups in Eastern Congo? And who are their international sponsors? If we had time, I would give this committee a story of during the peace process, what certain individuals told us, as in the secretariat, in the facilitation team, about the futility of the exercise. And these are people from Western countries, believe it or not. So I want to submit here that the problem in Eastern Congo that is now fronted by M23 is much, much, much deeply, is bigger and rooted in the resources of Congo and the interests therein. I wanted to ask Anita, what, Dr. Anita, is your view about the argument that the accusation that Rwanda and Uganda facilitate M23? Can you please respond to that? And let me stop there. And by the way, I would like to speak to you, Anita, after the conference, and see whether we can share thoughts about these same topics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Of course, given time, I couldn't go into those deep issues, but I believe I did mention about resources and the uprooting of certain individuals, the M23 basically, who that is their home, and they're being told, you know, you need to go back, you know, you're Tutsi, you need to go back to Rwanda where other Tutsi are found. So of course that is a bit slighting for, you know, individuals who belong, you know, in a country, they're citizens of a country, and then suddenly you're told you need to uproot yourself. Indeed, of course, after FIB, because there was a UN, you know, peacekeeping operation that was actually fronted by South Africa, Angola, and Tanzania to have the M23 quashed in the region. And during this time, the M23, they packed their bags and went, you know, in separate directions. Some of them were part and parcel of the National Army. They were reintegrated in the National Army. There are others who are reintegrated into society, but the others who felt that they would still have to come back. Some of their issues have not been resolved. Remember, these issues have been resolved. They're not been settled. And once you get to understand that even when you talk about negotiation, what are those procedural issues? What are the substantive issues? Because all we get to see, even through the conference, it's just bringing in the facilitation of states, governments, and people who think that it's about power. Yet, of course, you're talking about the livelihoods of individuals and resources that are found therein. So the facilitation by Rwanda and Uganda, indeed, the M23 found their home. They actually became refugees in Rwanda. They became refugees in Uganda. The fact that, of course, currently countries are saying that they were supported by Rwanda, still are being supported by Rwanda or being supported by Uganda is another thing altogether. Again, let us look at the complexity of issues, particularly when you talk about ethnic communities straddling borders in Africa. There's no way you can say that my brothers are being killed across the border and I'm not facilitating or ensuring that you know, they will remain safe, as it were. Because again, going back to Rwanda and what it was and how of course the government got into power, they were using some of these same people. I mean, it's the same community, you have got the same issues and the like. So again, certainly there's even no discussion about it. It's just that at times states may refrain from speaking that way because of diplomacy or diplomatically speaking about it. But of course, if you go to these countries, they'll know that there's no way you can, you know, have your brothers being killed and being told that they need to go back home. Which home? Yet the boundaries are quite clear. And the OAU stipulated that, including later on the AU, that we are not going to redraw any borders. And we are not going to send people across the borders just because your family or your brethren or your kin is found on one side of the border. So that's my, you know, take on this particular issue as it is.
Thank you very much, Anita. Thank you very much, Steven. Right,
just one more
dispute. Yeah, yes, please.
One more, yeah. Just also to advise take a look to the UN report of 2003 on material. Sorry, kid already come back to home, so it's too complicated. So yeah, to take back to the report of UN report of 2003 on the situation concerning the natural resources in also in Democratic Republic of Congo. Also, just a kind of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaonikes. Anita, any comments? So we stop here, right, with your. Okay, Anita.
Okay.
Yeah. I would like probably to support you, right? You started to say that you already know, you have many familiar faces here, right? In this conference, right? Probably it is one of our goals, right? To unite the community of experts on what we call like non-Western peacekeeping, peace building, right? Is very good, right? If we have direct links, direct relations with each other, right? It is really great, and there is this atmosphere of trustees. When we know each other for several months, for several years, there is an atmosphere of trustees, and I hope it will lead to, of course, to joint publications, right? Okay, before we go to Mexico, right, I would like to ask our colleague from Nigeria, Dr. Joshua Olusegun Balarinwa. Doctor, are you ready with your intervention?
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Hello, Doctor. Nice to meet you. You represent Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, right? Which is closer, I guess, to Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria, right? And your comments, your reflections would be of use for all of us. The floor is yours, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry for joining late. The connection here has been very difficult for a while, and it's because of the situation here. But my intervention is just for a few minutes, and it will be on the new approaches to peacekeeping and peace building, and we just have deliberations on them. I try to look at the definition and the concept of peace building and peacekeeping first. Then I also try to look at the concept of peace building, how peace building came into understanding, and what efforts have we witnessed in the area of peace building around the world generally, particularly in Africa. I try to look at peacekeeping as an active work to stop or prevent conflict between nations or communities, especially by an international military force. In other words, international military force is the only one that is legally binding to conduct peacekeeping. And beyond this, it comprises activities intended to create conditions that will favor lasting peace. In other words, conflict must have broken out. Violent conflict must have broken out before peacekeeping can be approved for the intervention. And once peacekeeping is approved, it is aiming at ensuring lasting peace or conditions that will favor lasting peace. Also, research generally has shown that peacekeeping reduces grueling deaths and battlefield deaths or civilian deaths. It reduces civilian deaths, it reduces battlefield deaths, as well as also reducing the risk of renewed warfare. The risk of renewed warfare. You know, in conflict resolution, a renewed warfare is a conflict which is escalated. An escalated conflict occurs when a previous conflict could not be well resolved, properly resolved, adequately resolved. In other words, they did not go through the root causes of such conflict. If such conflicts reignite or reoccur or get renewed, the conflict will become escalated, and it is also called renewed warfare. It's not only a renewed warfare in such there will be increase in number of deaths, destruction of houses, properties, ecosystems, environments will be affected. And this eventually will not go well for the people and the communities. So peacekeeping also involves interventions. It involves interventions in internal affairs of other countries. And this must occur, peacekeeping must occur within the framework. It must occur within the framework of international law to be very legitimate. Not only being legitimate, peacekeeping could also involve decisions about establishing, maintaining, or even expanding peacekeeping operations, and which is also the decisions made by only the Security Council of the United Nations. Only the Security Council of the United Nations. In other words, peacekeeping, establishing peacekeeping centers, maintaining peacekeeping centers, even expanding the operation of peacekeeping operations anywhere around the world has to get an approval and legitimacy or legal approval from the Security Council of the United Nations. And apart from that, I also try to bring into my explanation that coming back to Africa and particularly Nigeria, Nigeria has been involved in peacekeeping for over 50 years. Nigeria has been involved in peacekeeping operations for over 50 years, and Nigeria has done it more at the multilateral level, particularly at the level of the United Nations. Nigeria was involved at the peacekeeping operations of the United Nations in Congo in 1960. Nigeria sent policemen, and up to the present day, up to Manu River Union in Guinea-Conakry, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, even in Cote d'Ivoire, up to even now presently in Guinea-Bissau, Nigeria has 2 squadrons of mobile policemen for ensuring peacekeeping operations. And Nigeria has been very active in peacekeeping, and Nigeria has, at one time or the other, before 2015, Nigeria was among the 5 biggest or the first 10 largest contributors to peacekeeping operations of the United Nations. Again, I move to another section of the paper where I try to talk about, although in peacekeeping, there is also what we call peace missions, peace enforcement. So there are rules of engagement even in peacekeeping. I mentioned all of these symptoms, features of peacekeeping and peacekeeping operations. And the new thing about peacekeeping now is that new peacekeeping, everything does now not include active involvement of military force. There's also civilian peacekeeping now that the United Nations has designed so that even civilians will be involved in peacekeeping, in talking to, in facilitating an environment worthy of peace building, post-conflict reconstruction, and all of that. So what has become so new or new development to peacekeeping over time, from over 60 years or from how many decades the United Nations have introduced the concept of peacekeeping, is that we now have civilian peacekeeping. We now have UN peacekeeping operations where they are led by civilian or diplomats in facilitating good environment, to create an environment to ensure to return the society to status quo. Not only that, to also make sure that they create a situation whereby they can talk to the warring parties to facilitate an environment for post-conflict reconstruction, for lasting peace, for understanding among the conflict parties in order to ensure peaceful resolution of that conflict. Then I move to another part of the presentation that talks about peace building. Peace building, on the other area, is a positive, continuous, cooperative human endeavor to build bridges between conflicting nations and groups, it also aims at enhancing understanding and communication. In fact, it also dispel the wandering rocks, in quotes, of distrust. You know, there is this element of distrust during conflict, and particularly during peacemaking, during lasting peace, during post-conflict reconstruction, during the trying to bring the warring parties together to resolve the conflict. There's element of distrust, there's element of fear, there's element of hate. So peace building, try to dispel all of these wandering rocks of distrust, of fear and hate. So peacekeeping, in a nutshell, is a deliberate and systematic building of interactions, dense and durable, and even initiating a state in which peace is ensured. Now, not just peace, but sustainable peace. It also initiates programs that will facilitate peaceful understanding, peaceful resolutions, peaceful stopping of a violent conflict. The first person who first majorly talks about peace building was, in a more specific term, was former Secretary General of United Nations, Mr. Boutros Ghali, in his book, Agenda for Peace, where he was talking about actions to identify and to also support structures which will tend to strengthen and solidify peace in order to avoid a relapse into conflict. So in order to avoid a relapse into conflict, there is need for peace building, there is need for a durable peace, there is need for sustainable peace. This, although, has been a question that is not really enlightening enough, and that's why positive actions, bridges, understanding, communication, and initiating programs that will last and ensure durable and peaceful resolution of conflict is now initiated. So in peacekeeping, peace building, and rather, there is a focus on actions at the individual level, actions at the group level, societal level, multilateral level. So it's a means by which you are creating families, creating neighborhoods, and a world in which conflicts are not seen as a reason to attack or defeat the opponent. But what is ensured now is to make sure that there's an opportunity to work together with appropriate opponents to make things better for both parties to a particular conflict. Apart from this, in peacekeeping, peace building, I was involved in some activities, in peace building activities in Liberia.
5 minutes left, 5 minutes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was involved in peace. There are dimensions to peace building: the human phase, the environmental phase, the educational phase, the infrastructural phase, and also the economic phase. Because in peace building, which involves post-conflict reconstruction of the entire environment after a peaceful facilitation of an environment to enhance peacemaking and peace building. Under peace building, you want to develop programs that will bring the warring parties together, that will make them happy. Even sporting activities is a tool of peace building and post-conflict reconstruction. Economic activities where you help equip these people who have witnessed conflict. You equip them, you give them some financial incentive, you set them up, their children, even in refugee camps. You go and talk to them, speak to them, debrief them, give them what we call psychological debriefing. After debriefing them, you try to equip them with skills, capacity, understanding, financial support, economic support, programs and activities, educational support, sporting activities, recreational activities. If all of these are done at that individual level, group level, societal level, even at refugee camps. At the larger society, the government introduces economic activities that will engage everyone, that will make them happy, that will make them participate in all these activities. Before you know, the society will return to status quo, and there will be durable peace, lasting peace, ensured peace, and happiness and joy in the society. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Dear colleagues, any comments to our professor from Nigeria? Yes, Behruz, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yesterday, I was in a conference where there was a Nigerian participant who said the same thing as you said right now about keeping peace and achieving peace in Africa. Nevertheless, I would like to ask you a question regarding West Africa. If you know, there was news a couple of days ago when Nigeria proposed to have a regional force of ECOWAS, and therefore I would like to ask you a question. What is your opinion about the Nigerian role in this regional organization, and what's in your opinion in future this organization will be developed? Thank you again.
Okay. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Sincerely, Nigeria has been involved in peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace building in Africa, particularly in West Africa, especially in the ECOWAS. If you look at ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, it was Nigeria and Togo were the chief brains behind the establishment of ECOWAS in 1975. It was established in Lagos. Then Lagos was the capital of Nigeria before the capital was moved to Abuja in 1991. So the headquarters of ECOWAS was in Nigeria, and later Abi was in Lagos, but later it was moved to Abuja. So presently, as we discuss now in this conference, the capital of ECOWAS and the headquarters of ECOWAS is in Abuja, Nigeria. Now, it was as a result of so many conflicts in West Africa, particularly with the outbreak of conflicts in Liberia in 1989 December, and with the spilling over of the conflict into Sierra Leone, and later Cote d'Ivoire, even Guinea-Conakry. All of these four countries in Africa, they are referred to as the Mano River Union. In the Mano River Union, the conflict was very cruel. It led to a large number of deaths of women and children. It also led to a large number of amputees. They cut their arms. They cut their legs. So it was described in the literature as the most cruel conflict in Africa. And this Mano River Union falls under ECOWAS region. So Nigeria, under President Ibrahim Babangida, had to make an initiative to create a regional force, which was called ECOMOG, Economic Monitoring Group, ECOMOG. This group was initially Nigeria's creation. It has Nigerian forces, it has Ghanaian forces, and it has some Senegalese forces. So some other West African countries like Ghana and Senegal contribute troops, but it was an initiation or an initiative from the Nigerian government to create a regional peaceful making mechanism, regional force to stabilize and facilitate peaceful resolution of conflict and disasters or problems in West Africa. So Nigeria created this to ensure peacekeeping in West Africa, to ensure peacemaking in West Africa, and more importantly, to ensure peace building in West Africa. Because most times, if you look at conflicts in the Mano River Union, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, in Guinea-Conakry, even in Cote d'Ivoire, and move back even into Togo, or even part of Niger, you will see that all of these people run to Nigeria when they face conflict. They run to Nigeria for refuge, for safety, for help, for support, and all of that, which Nigeria has always provided right from the 1960s, particularly from the 70s up to now. I mentioned in my presentation that presently, as we speak now, Nigeria has 2 squadrons of mobile policemen, apart from the soldiers, and apart from rebuilding and renovating their barracks in Guinea-Bissau, Nigeria has presently 2 squadrons of mobile policemen training their police, training their military, and trying to help them in facilitating peacemaking, peace-building environment. Also, we did the same thing in Liberia. Up till about 5 years ago, the chief of army staff in Liberia was a Nigerian general. Only in this current dispensation of President George Weah that they have a Liberian for the first time. Since the conflict, that they now have a Liberian as their chief of army staff. And presently, even the Liberian president had written to Nigeria that they want teachers, lecturers, professors and doctors to come to Liberia and be helping the Liberian government, Liberian citizens, and all of that. So Nigeria has been seriously and perfectly involved in ensuring regional security in West Africa through the ECOWAS, through the ECOMOG. Even the ECOMOG now is called ECOWAS Standby Force. The ECOMOG is presently called ECOWAS Standby Force. And Nigeria is also making that effort even in the Sahel.
Thank you very much. As a moderator, let me ask you one more question, personal question, right from me, from my part.
Okay.
How do you, whether Nigeria will become as active in peacekeeping and in peace building as it was in the past?
Okay. A lot of domestic challenges had actually hampered Nigeria's active participation in peacekeeping, particularly from around 2015 to date now. Nigeria is about 36 or 37 now, moving from between the first 10. And like you rightly observed, it is due to increase in domestic challenges. The insurgency Nigeria also faced at home. Unfortunately, the new Sahelian crisis now in the Sahel now. Then apart from that, the Lake Chad Basin crisis, the drying Lake Chad, and the growing problem of the herdsmen or pastoralists and the farmers, creating a lot of problems for Nigerians from the northeastern part of Nigeria. So all of these domestic challenges had affected Nigeria's participation in peacekeeping operations. But at the same time, that does not mean Nigeria is still not actively participating as we are speaking. As we are speaking, with Nigeria still have a company of troops in Eastern Congo. Nigeria still has partly in Guinea-Bissau, like I mentioned earlier. Nigeria has partly even in Mali, before we withdrew a troop earlier. So Nigeria is still a bit participating actively, only that we have reduced, like you observed, moderator, we have reduced the level of participation. But I know now, with the domestic challenges being abated now, with the help of European Union, even Russia, trying to help Nigeria too to a larger extent, we hope that the insurgency syndrome is reducing. The problem of the Sahel, though increasing, but Nigeria is guarded. So if that challenge is reduced and Nigeria move beyond the 2023 general elections peacefully, I think Nigeria will return to active participation like in the past in UN peacekeeping operations.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Joshua Olusegun Balarinwa. Thank you for your intervention and for your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And we go to Western Hemisphere, the last but not the least, Anna Teresa. Anna Teresa, how are you? It's not morning already, right? In Mexico, and the weather, right? What is the weather?
Yeah. Yes, Thank you very much. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
And the weather is hot, right?
Well, not so much because it's winter now in Mexico. Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you for this invitation, Professor Elena Savicheva, to participate in this very interesting workshop in my dear alma mater, Universität Ruden. We don't have in this Western Hemisphere peacekeeping operations now, was in IT, but we have other type of war. It is lawfare. For example, we know that Luis Inácio da Silva is back as president in Brazil, but Bolsonaro isn't want this. And also we know that Cristina Fernandez has a sentence of prisons for 6 years. And also President of Peru, Castillo, was overthrown yesterday. And why? Why is these events? They are not criminals. The question is the lawfare war in our continent. And I am very pleased to with you, with the African colleagues, very interesting, and other colleagues of other countries. And thank you very much, Mr. Dennis Dekterev, for your chair. And I want to talk about that in 1950, the United States economy generated half of the world's gross product. At the beginning of the 21st century, its production represents only 21% of the world total. In 1950, 60% of the world's manufactured production was created in the United States. But in the 1999, it represented 25%. In the 90s, the world sales of the 100 largest multinationals in this country decreased from 30 to 25%. In contrast, the participations of multinationals from the European Union in this time grew from 41 to 46%. Now we know, due to the war, due to the conflict in Ukraine, the European Union was lost this rank, and they are in very great problems. 21% of direct investment of the world in 2001 was of North American origin, compared to 47% of in 1960. Between 1960 and the 2001, 17% of new foreign investment was from the United States, Great Britain, France, and Belgium. 37% of foreign investment in the world. The terminal crisis of USA hegemony is being provoked not by the emergence of other aggressive powers, but by these countries' resistance to adjust to the changes and accommodate itself in the new world that is emerging. The resistance to change, to adjustments and accommodations on the part of the United States can contribute to understanding the doctrine of preemptive strikes developed by the administration in Washington since 2001. The momentum and tone of the new dominant doctrine in Washington rejects the traditional notion of hegemony that is based on the prudent and restricted use of power, which conceals force and seeks by all means consensus and convictions. The processes of privatization, globalization, and deregulation of the economy have been imposed since 1980 through various mechanisms, among which the World Trade Organization has been the most important. Starting in 1995, the United States considered that the negotiations in the WTO did not always move as quickly as they wanted and promoted negotiation for the formation of regional free and trade areas. The first negotiations that managed to get off the ground that same year were to create a free trade area for all America. Since then, the United States has tried without much success to develop regional negotiations in Africa and Asia as well. The JUICE initiative did not go unnoticed. According to specialist Grain, the peoples of the entire world have suffered the effects of the so-called free trade and processes of rejection of the prevailing economic model have gradually developed. The discontent had a dramatic expression in 1999 in Seattle, where thousands of social activists from all over the world developed several days of protest against the ministers of more than 80 countries of the WTO, who were meeting to continue advancing in the processes of globalization. From there, the discontent has been expressed in an increasingly massive and multiple way. The American strategy in Latin America is not homogeneous. The United States has a good understanding of the levels of economic and political development of each country and sub-region. We can say that it has divided the region into 4 areas. With each of these areas, it has established its own negotiation strategy. This heterogeneous analysis is done despite praise from the State Departments, in the sense that the Latin American region enjoys a new homogeneity product of the existence of electoral and democratic regimes. In the first instance, it identifies countries where the economic adjustment process has progressed more satisfactorily. In this area is Chile and Mexico, but recently our President López Obrador has changed the situation, and he is restoring the natural resource of Mexico, oil and other raw materials as lithium. In the case of Chile, the Pinochet dictatorship softened the productive sectors and repressed, as we know, the popular sectors with relative success. The governments of the concertation have continued the adjustment policies and signed a free trade agreement with the United States. In the case of Mexico, as I said, the governments of Salinas and Cedillo laid the foundations to deepen the adjustments, and they sealed the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994, but the current Mexican government has been recovering natural resources and building infrastructure.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, I want to say that in the multipolar world that is emerging in the 21st century, a new instrument such as the post-neoliberal states is emerging in the region. The rise to power of these neoliberal governments means that the transformation of transnationals into a decisive force in the world economic, along with Western competition with Asia to maintain supremacy in the leadership of international relations, were two fundamental aspects of the emergence of neoliberal policy in England and in the United States. These policies were applied indiscriminately through the strategies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to developing countries. The Washington Consensus was therefore imposed. These situations had the consequences that in the southern cone of America, a new generation of politicians came to power who opposed the application of the orthodox policies of the Washington Consensus, and fundamentally, except for Honduras, this new generation of politicians believes that Latin America may be limited to free trade agreements with the United States. There has been a very significant change in recent years. In conclusion, the emergence and rise to power of the anti-neoliberal political forces consolidate the so-called post-neoliberal governments in this region, which are emerging as a response to the loss of sovereignty over national resources in favor of big international capital and to an imminent danger of liquidation of the national state, with an independent project in the nation states that have had neoliberal governments for several years. The support for these political forces by a large part of the population in Latin America is due to the deterioration in living standards that it has experienced due to the application of free market policies that dramatically polarize wealth. The fundamental characteristics of post-neoliberal governments are defined by the task they intended to carry out when they come to power. Internally, the recovery of the national project with regard to the autonomy of the economic project and the rescue of state institutions and their political strengthening. On the other hand, the application of a social policy that reduces the enormous social polarization inherited from neoliberal governments. In foreign policy, these governments try, through economic, technological, and diplomatic cooperation, to build a network of international relations and coalitions that make it possible to build multipolar international relations that in turn make it possible to confront use unilateralism, a product of the disintegration of the another superpower, the Soviet Union, and therefore the end of bipolarity in international relations, which then allowed a balance of power on the international stage favorable to medium developed countries. In conclusion, post-neoliberal governments unite their efforts to create international relations that allow the reconstruction of a multipolar world. And Russia and China have been the countries that in particular have inaugurated a new stage in Latin American relations, since they have signed trade and investment pacts through the continent, concentrating above all on Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, Peru, Uruguay, and Chile, which is changing the geopolitical environment of the region in favor of a more balanced economic, political, and military exchange development. Thank you very much for with us.
Thank you very much, Anna Teresa. Thanks a lot. Dear colleagues, any comments, questions to our professor from Mexico? Anna Teresa, she represents Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana Mexico. Okay, no comments. I guess we stop here, right? Thank you very much. Today, in fact, we spoke about peacekeeping and peace building both in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Almost everybody, all speakers were with us, and except probably our colleague from India, right? I would like to say thank you to all of us, both to speakers, but also to our participants who were very active, who asked questions, etc. Probably Stanislav, if you have any final remarks, right?
Thank you very much. No, it's not for me to make the final remarks. Just wanted to thank you. Indeed, very impressive and educative. Heard a lot of speaking from the bottom of hearts, from those who know the problems of the country's regions. And I wish we had same knowledgeable interlocutors during the intergovernmental negotiations. But anyway, I'm happy for the knowledge I received today. And thank you very much all for that.
Thank you, Stanislav. Dear colleagues, if you have any closing remarks, please don't hesitate. Anita writes, thank you, organizers. Thank you, Anita. It was great to meet you once again. Once again, thank you, everybody, right? And I think it's our 8th seminar on peacekeeping, peace building in Global South, right? So it is our final seminar, right? And I think like a conclusion, right? It was very strong, right? Many non-Western countries were represented, and people gave their remarks. And as we already talked, I think one of the goals was to create this atmosphere of trusts between scholars from Global South, from non-Western countries, and I think we have at least some success in these regards. Thank you, and have a nice day to Anna, right, and good evening to others. Yeah.